Hello and welcome to episode 46 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Today's episode is titled Secret Life of Beta Cells. So we are learning all about the things you never knew beta cells could do. And as it relates to the state of type 1 diabetes, what are the things at work either keeping beta cells oppressed? What are the things that we can do to help alleviate some of the unnecessary stress that are keeping them in the conditions that keep us in a diabetic state? And what's the science behind it? Where is the research going? What's the technology saying in terms of how realistic is it for beta cells to be regenerated? What are the conditions and the circumstances that are going to allow for those newly regenerated beta cells to flourish? So I'm really excited for this episode. I'm happy you're here. Let's go ahead and get started.
In this episode, we're going to cover 7 main topics. First one being Beta Cell 101. What are the basics of beta cells from terminology to what their purpose is in both a healthy state as well as in a diabetic state? We'll go into the development, function, and secretions of beta cells. So from differentiation all the way to being a mature beta cell, what are the things that they make? What are the things that make them go? Transitioning into a state of disease. So with type 1 diabetes, what happens to beta cells? And we'll talk about whether or not they can grow, right? We've been convinced for the longest time that once they're gone, they're gone. Is that the case? We'll find more out about that. And then I want to talk specifically about amylin and GABA. Those are 2 of the other things that beta cells release and the implications of the loss of those for those with diabetes, as well as for those developing diabetes. We're going to talk about ways that we can naturally support beta cell health. What are the things that we can do on a day-to-day basis that are going to allow our beta cells to reseed and reflourish? And then looking to the future, what is the future of beta cell research, both from a holistic kind of homegrown kind of way, as well as from a technology and research standpoint? So let's go ahead and get started with Beta Cell 101. So this is a question every person with diabetes needs to have asked themselves at some point within their diagnosis, because this is kind of like ground zero, as far as we understand it now, for the development of diabetes. So beta cells are specialized cells in the pancreas designed to help regulate blood sugar and facilitate digestion of the food, like the source of that blood sugar. It's located in clusters of cells called islets of Langerhans. Islets of Langerhans, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the primary role is to produce and release insulin in response to blood sugar levels, right? So goal, aim, number 1 of all beta cells is to make sure that they are able to release insulin in response to elevating blood glucose levels. And then we'll talk about some of the key terms, okay? So islets of Langerhans, those are the clusters of cells that include alpha, beta, delta, gamma. There's numerous cell types within all of the islets, but they're clusters of cells where beta cells reside. And we'll talk a little bit more in just a second, I think, about the composition of the islets of Langerhans and what the spread and the balance is between all of those different cell types. Insulin, it's a hormone that lowers blood sugar by helping glucose enter the cell, right? When we eat, food enters the small intestine, it gets absorbed into the blood to be distributed to the cells. Insulin is the key that opens up cells to allow that glucose to flow in and be utilized for energy. If we do not have insulin, that glucose is not able to enter the cell. Our blood glucose elevates, leading to hyperglycemia. Amylin. Amylin is a hormone that complements insulin by slowing digestion or modulating digestion to match insulin's ability to regulate blood sugar, right? So Amylin is one of the other hormones secreted by beta cells, and it is meant to complement the action of insulin. So and we'll talk more about it later in the podcast, but it's something that makes sure that our system doesn't get overloaded from a speed of digestion standpoint. It's like a pace car that makes sure that insulin doesn't get overrun with the food that we are putting through our stomach and into our intestines. And then GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter. It's gamma aminobutyric acid. It's a neurotransmitter that protects beta cells, calms the nervous system, kind of enacts the parasympathetic nervous system, and helps to balance hormones throughout the body as a result of that. It's got a relationship with cortisol, melatonin, a bunch of things. Then a few more key terms. Paracrine. Paracrine signaling is cell signaling where a cell releases substances that act on nearby or neighboring cells. So this is something where, let's say, beta cells release insulin that act on alpha cells to stop making glycogen, right? It's kind of like if insulin is being produced by beta cells, that in itself is a signal to alpha cells to turn off. Autocrine, which is the opposite of paracrine. Paracrine is other. Cell signaling where a cell releases a substance that acts on itself, right? So this is something where, let's say, a cell is turned on and it gets to a point where it has accumulated so many things, so many of a particular substance within itself that it lets itself know that it needs to shut down. So it, through signaling like within itself, knows to shut down. Okay, and you can kind of see on this this diagram here, autocrine, it's all self-contained. It's acting on itself. It's regulating itself. Paracrine, it's working with others. And then endocrine and exocrine are kind of based in a larger system. It's going into the bloodstream and into the digestive system. Endocrine refers to glands or cells that release hormones directly into the bloodstream, allowing them to act on distant target organs. Okay? Having diabetes means you go to the endocrinologist. Insulin, or rather the pancreas, is both an endocrine and an exocrine organ. Insulin acts within the endocrine system because insulin is put into the cell cavity, and it is affecting the level of sugar in the blood, which impacts other organs. Okay, exocrine refers to glands or cells that secrete substances into ducts that lead to an external surface or organ. And the digestive system, exocrine, when I hear exocrine, I usually just think of the digestive system, because what a lot of people don't realize is that, technically speaking, our digestive system is not within our body cavity. It is technically an exterior surface, just contained within the body. So someone described it to me this one way, and I've never been able to see it any other way. Take a hot dog. If you think about a hot dog, and you were to pass a straw through the long end of it, right, so that you could kind of look through it like a binocular, that's technically that the space within that straw that you're able to see from one end through to the other is technically our digestive system. One end being our mouth, the other end being our butt. So if you were within the straw, within the hot dog, you are technically not within the body of the hot dog. And again, I've spent way too much time talking about exocrine, but just for a good visual on how you can see that and understand the differences between endocrine and exocrine function. So beta cells release insulin, which impact blood sugars, which affect the organs within the body. Pancreases also create digestive enzymes, which are secreted into the intestines, which help digest food that is technically outside of the body. That is an exocrine function. Moving on. All right. And I just want to touch on the islets of Langerhans a little bit more because I know that this phrase, the islets of Langerhans, is tossed around a lot on social media, and it is a very easy way to sound very smart when it comes to diabetes. And I just want to make sure that people have context and background with that, just so that they are not easily impressed by people who just throw around the islets of Langerhans like it's, medical terminology. Here it is, okay? So it's named after a scientist, German scientist, who discovered these clusters of cells within the pancreas. They make up about 1 to 2% of the volume, the mass of pancreas, which is not very much. I was really surprised by that. Each pancreas, on average, contains about 1 million islets. And then within those islets, so the islets of Langerhans consist of anywhere from 60 to 80% islets, so they're the majority beta cells. Alpha cells are the next greatest group, 15 to 20%. They're producing glucagon, which acts opposite insulin. Glucagon raises blood sugar, insulin lowers it. Delta cells produce somatostatin, which regulates insulin and glucagon release. That's kind of like the mediator between the two. It also has digestive functions, if I remember correctly. And then pancreatic polypeptide cells, they produce pancreatic polypeptide, which affects digestion and appetite. This goes into kind of the exocrine realm of things. They're influencing food and the intake of food. And then epsilon cells, very small segment of the pancreas, create ghrelin, which is the hormone that influences hunger. That's the hunger hormone. So when you hear people say islets of Langerhans, this is what they're referring to, okay? It is a very easy way for people to sound very sciencey. Make sure that they know what they're talking about when they reference the islets of Langerhans. This is a slide that is going to be very helpful for you in terms of learning the ins and outs of islets of Langerhans. So let's talk quickly about how beta cells actually regulate blood sugar. So beta cells have a channel within their cell membranes which allows glucose into the cell without actually needing insulin, right? Because a lot of people, we know that insulin lets glucose into the cell, but in order for beta cells to know to release insulin, they have to sense an increase in blood sugar. So they can't release insulin without sensing glucose. But how do they sense glucose without releasing insulin? And it's through the GLUT transporters, the glucose transporter channels through their cell membranes. So when we eat, the food is digested, it is processed in the small intestine where sugar is absorbed into the blood. When that happens, that beginning increase in blood sugar, that glucose enters the beta cells through that GLUT transporter. That glucose that goes into the beta cell lets it know that, hey, it's time to start producing insulin. Blood sugar's on its way up. We've got food coming down the chute, okay? So insulin then helps glucose enter the cells in the rest of the body, every cell type, to be used for energy or to be stored for energy later. Insulin also has roles in fat storage. And then maintaining balance. So it's preventing blood sugar from getting too high and also prevents it from getting too low. It has some self-regulating mechanisms so that, it's not overproducing insulin and sending us into a hypoglycemic state. So it's got good communication between those alpha and beta cells, making sure that we're not going low, we're not going high. And we'll touch on this. I've got a whole section of the podcast later on dedicated to actually going into the ins and outs of amylin and GABA, but everyone needs to know that beta cells don't just produce insulin. They also produce amylin and they also produce GABA. Okay? And just a quick little resume on amylin. When insulin is released, amylin is also released. This is something that helps slow gastric emptying. It is something that is going to help you feel full, and that feeling of fullness is something that's going to help you stop eating or slow you down eating, so that the incoming food does not overrun the body's ability to produce insulin and regulate blood sugars, right? So this is preventing the eating everything all at once. Everything gets absorbed all at once, and your beta cells are like they just get bum rushed with sugar. They're not able to produce insulin at the proper rate. Amylin prevents that. It's kind of like the brakes. It's the pace car. GABA, neurotransmitter that regulates inflammation. It has a role in sympathetic and parasympathetic balance. Sympathetic is the fight or flight. This is kind of associated with higher cortisol, alertness, a lack of hunger or appetite. It's kind of like that wired sensation. Parasympathetic is the rest and digest, right? A key term here being digest, right? So beta cells are most active during food intake. And you would imagine in times of intaking food, you need to be in a state where your body is capable of digesting it, right? So beta cells have this unique tool in influencing the nervous system to put our body in a state of digestion, okay? And anytime you are promoting beta cell activity and digestion, you are also suppressing the alpha cells and that glucagon secretion. So glucagon and the release of stored glycogen from the liver is going to be more influential in states of sympathetic nervous system activity, right? That fight or flight state. Cortisol is something that is going to spike blood sugars through gluconeogenesis, as well as the release of glycogen stores from the liver. And again, we'll go a little bit more in depth on this a little bit later.
All right, so now that we've got the basic terminology, the basic terms behind the physiology of beta cells, now it's a little bit easier to understand some of the more advanced concepts going into how beta cells develop. So paracrine, autocrine, exocrine, endocrine, the islets of Langerhans, right? The magical term that makes people seem so smart. Now we actually understand what makes them whole, and that beta cells are only just one component, given the majority of it, but still interesting. Let's go ahead and head into the next section where we'll learn more about how beta cells mature.
Now, I absolutely love this graphic here. It is from a paper called, I believe, Why and How Beta Cells Mature, or How Beta Cells Secrete Insulin. I'll have it listed in the description, but this is just such an interesting graphic. I just wrote an article about it not long ago, and I'm just excited about it because in the making of this podcast, I've learned a lot. This is not something I just went in and recorded stuff I knew. I was learning along the way. So not all beta cells are created equal. Okay? So from embryonic formation, like within the newborn baby, entering the world and developing the tools to process glucose, process fat, process any sort of food intake. So beta cells form in the pancreas during fetal development. These are brand new. They don't have all the bells and whistles that a mature adult beta cell has. So after they're born, they enter postnatal maturation. They undergo functional changes that enhance their ability to sense glucose, and as a result of that sensing glucose, release insulin. It's all dependent on nutritional and hormonal changes within the child, right? We know the effects that cortisol have on blood sugar regulation. We know the effects that nutrients have on the cellular biology and physiology and its ability to release and produce insulin. So all of these things in that postnatal state are going to impact the baby's ability to not just make beta cells, but make functional beta cells. There's a big difference there. And then when you consider all of the systems that go into and are affected by proper glucose metabolism, there's a lot to think about, right? So we'll cover regeneration in just a little bit, but beta cells face very high stress from the beginning, just because of their sheer role in the body, high metabolic activity. They're really never not on. They're always producing insulin to some degree, right? They're playing balance in a rest state between the glucagon and the alpha cell, the beta cell. And then during activity or during food intake, they are really firing on all cylinders to make sure that all the cells are getting the energy they need. And this requires a lot of coordination between multiple systems in the body. The gut-brain axis, right? So our gut takes in the food. It has to be able to tell our brain to tell the rest of the organs in our body what's going on and why. From a hormonal standpoint, GABA, right, the hormone secreted by beta cells, has a huge role in influencing the brain, influencing the nervous system. The gut-liver axis, so the liver and the gut, two huge digestive organs, right? So they need to coordinate what are the nutrients we're taking in, what are the nutrients we're able to absorb, what are the nutrients we're able to use, is everything being distributed properly, and are cells able to do what they need to do, right? From a person with diabetes standpoint, do my beta cells have the necessary nutrients to operate at this high metabolic activity that is required of them? And then you think of the HPA axis, so hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So this is nervous system control. This is like I'm trying to think of the word for it. Ground zero. It's like the nucleus of the nervous system and how it's interacting with the body. This is like vagus nerve tone, that it's heavily influencing the ability to go back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we touched a little bit on it on the section before, but what are beta cells doing on a day-to-day basis? So they're producing insulin. Blood sugar comes in after we eat our food. Insulin gets released so that beta cells can regulate the energy available to all of the other cell types in the body. They signal with alpha cells and delta cells, right? Delta cells are kind of like the coach, the go-between in alpha and beta cells to ensure that that blood sugar is never going too high, which would be either underactive beta cells or overactive alpha cells, or going too low, which would be overactive beta cells and underactive alpha cells. So there's always a lot of crosstalk going on in those islets of Langerhans between all of those cell types. And then amylin and GABA, right? And this is just a helpful little graphic here. Amylin is slowing how quickly that food is moving through your system. It's promoting satiety. That feeling of fullness is your body telling you, hey, slow down. We need to make sure that we're able to process our food at a good speed so that we can absorb everything that we need to. And to prevent overconsumption, right? Like that feeling of fullness is the body saying, hey, listen, we've got enough. No, we don't need to take in any more. Those with diabetes who lose that amylin have no feedback on whether or not they're full or not, whether or not they've gotten enough nutrients. And that's why, and I've been a victim of this hundreds and thousands of times, where the only time you ever feel full is when you are physically stuffed. Your stomach can literally not hold anymore. And that's kind of like, okay, I guess I have to stop eating now. And that, for the record, is not normal in the slightest. Not normal. You should not have to fill your stomach to the brim to feel quote unquote full. There are feedback loops, there are hormones that are there to prevent that from happening and ensure that you're getting the most out of your food. Okay? So amylin influencing the speed of digestion to ensure that you don't overstuff yourself. GABA calms inflammation, protects beta cells from immune attacks, so it does have an anti-inflammatory effect in terms of quieting the immune system. It acts on alpha cells, and there's an interesting study which I'll have linked in the description as well. Prolonged exposure to GABA can actually de-differentiate alpha cells. It can turn alpha cells into beta cells. There's a graph on that we'll touch later on in the podcast. So if you are exposed to high enough levels of GABA, your body will actually convert alpha cells that produce glucagon into beta cells that are able to produce insulin. So it just introduces this whole new dynamic of flexibility between cell types within those islets of Langerhans. So really, really interesting. And then obviously the nervous system stuff, just from a sheer operating level of my body is wired, fight or flight, not ready to digest food because we might have to run or we might have to fight, to that parasympathetic state. I'm safe. I'm able to actually enjoy and allow my body to kind of feed and recover, kind of thing. And a little bit more about beta cells and their levels of vulnerability when it comes to either pathogenic attack or internal distress, internal oxidative stress, and acting against the immune system, which of course is a focus of those with type 1 diabetes because of the alleged autoimmune origins. So beta cells have inherently low levels of antioxidant enzymes. Catalase and glutathione peroxidase are just two of them. Catalase is something that helps break down, I want to say starch. I should know that, but and then glutathione peroxidase is something that is able to regenerate glutathione. And that glutathione is like a major antioxidant in the cell. It's something that neutralizes reactive oxygen species. I'm just looking up catalase right now. I'll give you a quick rundown in a second. Common enzyme found in nearly all living organisms exposed to oxygen, which catalyzes the decomposition of hydrogen peroxide to water and oxygen. There you go. So hydrogen peroxide is a reactive oxygen species. Catalase is something that neutralizes it into water and oxygen, which is something that our body is much more able to dispose of, use, and is not harmful. Hydrogen peroxide can be harmful at elevated levels. So there you go. Catalase, glutathione peroxidase, they're both things that help neutralize oxidative stress. Beta cells don't have high levels of them, even in healthy cases. There's this particular author whose name is Sigurd Lenzen. I'll have papers of his in the description as well, but he has been focusing on beta cell defense for a long time, like basically asking the question, why are beta cells so susceptible to immune attack? And it turns out they don't have a lot of good natural defenses, which is confusing because of the next point, their high metabolic activity. So we touched on it before, but beta cells are going all the time. And every reaction has a byproduct, right? There's some degree of waste in every metabolism, whether it's healthy or not. So with this high metabolic activity, beta cells also produce a lot of waste. And waste in the cell comes in the form of reactive oxygen species. No cell is a stranger to ROS, right? ROS is a sign of just a healthy metabolism. It's a matter of degree. So beta cells create a lot of ROS as a byproduct of their high metabolism, and they don't have a lot of good enzymes to handle those ROS, like the catalase and the glutathione peroxidase. How does that make sense? So without adequate antioxidant defenses, beta cells tend to be more prone to oxidative damage. So it seems that they operate kind of on the edge of too much, right? They are high stress cells in and of themselves. They have just enough antioxidant defense to keep those things neutral. In the states of diabetic stress, this last point here, exposure to high glucose levels, like whether that be like a chink in the armor of the other systems protecting beta cells, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, or internal deficits of particular enzymes responsible for handling ROS. Any type of extra stress on beta cells is more than it can handle. It's like at the brim of chaos. Anything more than, basal level stuff is sending it over the edge. So this stress is what contributes to its dysfunction. Its dysfunction leads to its apoptosis, which is its cell death. This kind of starts that loop of beta cells leading to diabetes. Because if you think about it, if one beta cell goes down, that's putting more stress on other beta cells because, it's one less input of insulin, one less input of all the other things. It just kind of starts this kind of domino effect. It seems to start this domino effect down the stretch for the other beta cells. So for this section, the key takeaways: beta cells are complex and multifunctional. They are not just insulin, like food in, insulin out, right? They make amylin, they make GABA, right? And because they make amylin and they make GABA, they have profound impacts on our digestion and on our ability to handle inflammation and influence our nervous system. They mature dynamically. There is flexibility within the cell types of each islet of Langerhans, right? Alpha cells, beta cells, delta cells, epsilon cells, gamma cells, they all exhibit a certain degree of flexibility. They can change into other types of cells, which is just crazy, absolutely crazy. So the beginning beta cell is not the same as the end beta cell, and there are unique factors that go into what turns a young beta cell into an old beta cell. They are intrinsically vulnerable to their own metabolic activity, right? So they're operating on the edge of chaos. Any sort of deficit, whether it be in a protective mechanism in an outside system or within the cell itself, anything that pushes it in any direction is too much. And that kind of starts this unique susceptibility to oxidative stress and starts that domino effect. And so considering, the chronic exposure to either high glucose, excess fatty acids, environmental toxins and stresses, these are all contributing to beta cell dysfunction and cell death. And again, just a quick highlight on Sigurd Lenzen. Let's see if I can move this. I can. Sigurd Lenzen is the author. These are just 3 titles of his. If you're interested in the research aspect of this, I highly recommend you look his name up. He's got a lot of really great resources talking about beta cells and their natural defenses. Invaluable work. He's super big fan.
Now, taking what we've learned about the dynamic qualities of beta cells, the fact that just because it differentiates into a beta cell doesn't necessarily mean it's doing the same things that a mature beta cell is doing. we're learning so much about the potential of pancreatic tissue, not just beta cells, because the flexibility aspect, beta cells, alpha cells, delta, they can all become different things and develop different qualities depending on the environmental circumstances. And the fact that they're intrinsically vulnerable to elevated oxidative stress introduces this whole new can of worms when it comes to the autoimmune theory behind diabetes, because it's not like an immune system needs to create this attack on beta cells, right? Like beta cells are something to be attacked and defeated. No, because with their natural defenses so low, it's a very real possibility that beta cells are simply passive victims to a pre-existing inflammatory state. And so this just really blows things open. So now, with that in mind, let's think about the state of beta cells in type 1 diabetes.
So what happens in type 1 diabetes? There are multiple theories, right? I'm partial to a couple. I'm going to focus kind of on the multifactorial look at diabetes as opposed to like the singular, it's autoimmune or, it's genetic, whatever. My take is that type 1 diabetes results from a combination of several factors: genetic origins, environmental origins, immune factors, nutritional factors. They all play a part in that stress that is reaching the beta cells. And it's not just autoimmunity. There are pathogenic infections, the nutritional imbalances and deficits, and perhaps physiological deficits in the beta cells themselves that are contributing to the onset of the disease itself. And you've got this cool little Venn diagram here of, it's once you see all the factors that play into the development of diabetes, you're impressed because it's more than what you thought it was. But then you see how each of those factors play into each of the other factors. And there's just so many webs of complexity to this. And it's just, it can be overwhelming, but when you're coming at it from a research aspect, it's kind of fascinating to see all of the different pieces at play. Let's take another look, right? So these here are the main three that I mentioned, right? You've got this genetic predisposition. What are the genes at play that are, contributing to the ease of development of the disease? Environmental triggers. Could be nutrition, could be pathogens, you name it. Immune dysfunction, right? Something about our immune system isn't cleaning up the mess like it's supposed to. Why not? When you combine the genetic influence with the immune dysfunction, right? What about our genes is not clicking the right switches for immune function? Right? There's interplay between those two, obviously. The genes are influencing our ability to handle and regulate the immune system. You look the other way, genes and environmental triggers. Genes aren't clicking the right switches for, let's say, nutrient absorption, right? Maybe the genes in our guts are not properly turned on to properly absorb fat-soluble vitamins or iron or copper. Anything in your food can be influenced genetically. It also works the other way around, and I should make that point here. No arrow in this flow chart is one directional. It flows both ways, right? So environmentally, and we think about how it influences our genetic predisposition, what nutrients are we giving our body to supply proper DNA handling? Right? When you look at DNA, when you look at gene manipulation, DNA repair mechanisms, all of them require vitamins and minerals to properly operate. And in states of imbalance or deficiency, why wouldn't that impact the mechanisms in the cell and how they operate and how they turn genes on or off? So it does go both ways. So let's talk about the immune system a little bit. What are the ways in which our immune system is suspect in all of this? They talk about molecular mimicry, right? Mistaken identity. This could be T cells, which are a function of they're a type of cell in our immune system that helps attack invaders. Have our beta cells been incorrectly labeled as enemies? Why? That's kind of the prevailing theory, without anyone actually investigating the beta cell, right? We're all so ready to villainize the immune system and wonder why beta cells are being attacked by the immune system, but we're not actually asking why the beta cell looks the way it looks. And maybe it's kind of like not healthy, and that's why the immune system, but that's talk for another time. The cytokine storm that results from this. So cytokines are like inflammatory markers that let our immune system know where and when to attack. So inflammatory cytokines amplify immune responses, worsening beta cell destruction. So this is kind of feeds into the domino effect. Once one beta cell is targeted, it spills its contents into the open. Once the immune system senses that a cell has kind of spilled, it's kind of like, hang on a sec, we got, clean up on aisle 4. It heads in, it marks everything that has spilled into the open with cytokines so that our immune system knows what needs to be cleaned up. This cytokine release and mark for cleanup initiates even more levels of immunity that come in, and it can be overwhelming, especially for those beta cells that are on the edge of handling the existing ROS within them. And then obviously the genetic predisposition. They might just not have the right genes, right? The HLA genes are the human leukocyte antigen genes. So this has to do with our body's ability to identify friend from foe. It helps our body not attack itself and identify things foreign to our body. Discrepancies in that HLA block of genes, which is shown here, are tied not just to type 1 diabetes, but to almost all autoimmune diseases. I think over 50% of them. So things like lupus, things like rheumatoid arthritis, they all have issues with that HLA gene class. Then we think of environmentally viruses and bacteria as triggers, right? A lot of people on social media talk about parasites, or, hey, I got COVID and then I had diabetes. So there's a viral aspect to it as well. Coxsackie virus, which is the virus behind hand, foot, and mouth disease in children, has been shown to directly impact beta cells and initiate an immune response that ends up leading to diabetes. Epstein-Barr is one of them. Rubella is one of them. Cytomegalovirus, any kind of pathogenic activity in the body is going to be focused on obtaining glucose from its host, right? Glucose is like a source of life for anything. So when viruses invade, they're interested in getting sugar. How do you get sugar from a host? You make sure that their blood sugars are high. And so that makes sense when you go to attack the beta cell. And it also influences our gut microbiome, the bacteria present. So imbalances in our gut bacteria, gut dysbiosis, all the things behind Crohn's, IBD, their leaky gut syndrome, they're all increasing systemic inflammation because of their inability to properly clear out harmful pathogens, and leads to improper absorption of nutrients that are going to help the immune system work properly. So iron, I'm partial to iron as a particular culprit in this, because the same way that pathogens and viruses focus on sugar, they also focus on iron, because sugar in order to use sugar, you need iron. So there is equal importance in terms of any sort of pathogen in the body between sugar and iron. So that's something that they both focus on. And they've found that in people in states of diabetes and in these states of viruses and bacterial infections, iron metabolism is thrown way off, and it's in a direction that directly impacts beta cell health. And then obviously the role of diet and our environment, right? We've got this grocery store shelf of absolute trash. If any of this is in your house, get it out of there, right? So there are theories on early exposure to dairy, cow's milk protein, gluten. There's a lot of huge co-occurrence of celiac disease and type 1 diabetes, high glycemic diets. So high glycemic foods are foods that enter our digestive system and let go of a lot of sugar very quickly, right? And this is kind of fighting the effects of amylin, which is slowing it down and making sure insulin doesn't get overrun. Those high glycemic foods are challenging insulin's ability to properly regulate our blood sugars. And with these dietary triggers, I don't think about them often from it's, cow, dairy proteins look similar to insulin, and that's why people with diabetes don't make enough insulin. I think it has much more to do with the nutritional value of the foods. Pasteurized, ultra and pasteurized dairy loses a lot of its mineral content, a lot of its beneficial bacterial content. I think that has more of a direct impact on beta cell health than the molecular mimicry aspect of it. And then environmental toxins, chemicals like nitrosamines, heavy metals, glyphosate is another huge culprit in liver health impacting iron metabolism impacting beta cell health. So there's just a huge cascade that can result from dietary and environmental sources. Another question to ask ourselves, I alluded to it before, but in the autoimmune theory, we tend to like to only talk about the immune system, right? There's something wrong with the beta cell, there's something wrong with our immune system. It just acts on our beta cells completely out of the blue, right? Unprompted, unsolicited, just jumps on the beta cells. Well, we're starting to come to terms with the fact that there might be something wrong with the beta cells, right? Might be something internal. It might be something on the cell surface. Genetic mutations within the cell itself might predispose beta cells to early dysfunction, right? They may not be aging properly or maturing properly, which could be a sign for early death. Self-stress signals. So with protein folding, the endoplasmic reticulum and the beta cell's ability to handle the oxidative stress, make sure that it can create enough insulin and handle the oxidative stress that results from creating that insulin. So this is a wonderful article talking about all of the facets of beta cell health themselves that makes it a likely target of not a rogue immune system, but of a healthy immune system. So it might not actually be an immune issue. It might be a beta cell issue. And this is one of the papers I learned early on in my journey into reading all of this, and it opened up a window of so many opportunities for me. So, like we mentioned, it's a multifactorial disease involving many different things. It's I don't think it's any use to try and find the one right now. I think there's just so many different whack-a-mole holes that we can kind of focus on instead of just trying to hit the one mole. Lots of different ways. From a pathogenic standpoint, a nutrition standpoint, as well as antioxidant and immune standpoint. My personal focus, I talked a lot about iron rebalancing my iron metabolism, my liver health, clearing out gallstones, clearing out my gut, a lot of beneficial fiber, a lot of beneficial prebiotics, probiotics, fighting parasites, and focusing on whole foods and a nutrient-dense diet.
So when you consider all of the possibilities that are feeding into this loop of beta cell destruction, it can be a little bit overwhelming because, right, it used to be one thing. I only had to worry about my genes. And if you had gene therapy, then everything would be okay. And if I just didn't have enough beta cells, if I grew more beta cells, then everything would be fine. But when you realize the multifactorial aspect of the development of diabetes, you have to now start to pay attention to how each of these processes interloop, right? And it can become more complex, but when you realize that a lot of the ways in which you address those feedback loops overlaps with all of the other things feeding into diabetes, it simplifies things. So let's go into the next section here where we'll learn more about how people are regrowing beta cells now.
So I love this picture. Can beta cells grow? We've got all of these beta cells here imaged with this kind of loading screen. Like, is it ever going to load? We're all kind of just watching the pinwheel and the hourglass on our beta cell computer screens, wondering if they're ever going to load. So let's talk more about the regenerative potential and some of the obstacles beta cells face in regenerating and regrowing and maturing. So from day one of being diagnosed, we're told, hey, beta cells don't really regenerate. Once you lose them, they're gone for good. Unlike other cells, beta cells do not seem to be able to divide or repair very efficiently. And if you look here on the graph, I generated this off of ChatGPT, but I asked it to kind of judge beta cells' ability to regenerate versus other cell types. So skin cells regenerate a bunch. I think I've heard that, we regrow our skin like our entire skin like 7 times throughout our entire lifetime. Liver cells, liver is also very regenerative. It's able to regrow. It's taking, it has a lot of jobs, so it needs the ability to create new tissue. Muscle cells, beta cells, and neurons, man, they're just super low down there. Apparently not very good at regrowing. From an immune standpoint, an autoimmune standpoint, and kind of like disrupting the feedback loops at play here, without addressing what's causing the disturbance, whether it be from an immune standpoint or a beta cell standpoint, if we're not addressing the root cause, even if our beta cells can regenerate, if we can't stop them from being attacked, it doesn't really matter. And this bleeds into the inflammation and oxidative stress standpoint. We need to be able to address the root causes of the oxidative stress that are prohibiting regrowth and accelerating the dysfunction of the existing beta cells. So, how do they regrow naturally? This is an awesome graph. I've got it cited here. How, when, and where do human beta cells regenerate? And it turns out there's a lot of different ways. Can you believe this? So ductal cells and acinar cells are 2 of the major exocrine cell types in the pancreas. They are responsible for creating the digestive enzymes and juices. They can convert into beta cells. That's impressive in and of itself. They're not even endocrine organs or endocrine cells like the alpha, delta, gamma, epsilon cells, right? They're in the same neighborhood. Ductal and acinar cells, completely unrelated. Guess what? Given the right growth factors, PDX1, you'll see that mentioned a lot here. PDX1 in just about every single one. That's a insulin growth factor here, and I'll get the exact terminology here. I know it has a name tied to insulin. Yes. So PDX1, also known as insulin promoter factor 1, is a transcription factor. It's necessary for pancreatic development, including beta cell maturation. So there you go. It's a protein coded for growth of the pancreas. There are natural ways to increase its expression. Not wholly unfamiliar, though. It has to do with controlling oxidative stress. It has to do with introducing antioxidants. I know green tea was one of them. Curcumin was one of them. Vitamin D was one of the things that help increase PDX1. But basically, all of the things that you associate with healthy antioxidant dietary influences, they're all doing the right things when it comes to regrowing beta cells. But regardless, the process of beta cell growth slows significantly after early childhood, right? So we are birthed, beta cells are developing and maturing. We are feeding off of our mother, which is not super glucose rich from what I understand. But once we start to wean off of our mother, like year 2, year 3, typically, and we start to eat outside sources of glucose, boy, those beta cells are on fire and they're regenerating very rapidly. And then once we kind of go through that huge stage of growth, it really starts to kind of neutralize. Neogenesis. New beta cells can form from pancreatic progenitor cells. And these are kind of like floating cells within the pancreas, not floating physically, but floating in terms of they haven't been differentiated into a specific cell type just yet. They are able to become beta cells. Hepatocytes, these are liver cells. So liver cells can be converted into beta cells and can help convert existing pancreatic cells into beta cells. Enterocytes, this is from our gut, right? You'll see here that nice little term there, GLP-1. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with that. Glucagon-like peptide. That influences beta cell growth and regeneration. Then you've got alpha cells. Alpha cells themselves can actually convert to alpha cells, or can convert to beta cells because of this right here, GABA, right? Just incredible. I was amazed when I saw that graph of all of the different cell types that can help feed, either be converted directly to beta cells or influence their regeneration. And there it is. It's worth looking at on a close up, right? You see PDX, that insulin promoter factor 1. You've got GABA. You've got artemisinin. And I'm trying to think of what artemisinin is. A natural compound that is found let's see. Wormwood, which is very popular in the anti-parasite world. Wormwood is very anti-parasitic, but it also has artemisinin in it. Just really cool. That feeds into the immune system playing a role into all of this. So just really fascinating. So the current research, I'm starting with the natural compounds for beta cell regrowth because that's what I've been focusing on, because that's what's the most immediately available to me. Harmine, I've made a whole podcast episode about it. It is a DYRK1A inhibitor. So this is something that Harmine is something that prevents a anti-cell development process, which is the DYRK1A. Pretty cool. And I'm not sure if I talk about it, but DYRK1 and GLP-1 actually synergize to help target beta cell growth. Different polysaccharides found in certain mushrooms like reishi, Bee pollen and particular plants can actually promote beta cell survival, so the retention of existing beta cells as well as beta cell growth and regeneration. And then obviously GABA. GABA can convert alpha cells to beta cells. There's plenty of different ways to source GABA from your diet. A lot of fermented foods, kimchi and sauerkraut are really good sources of it. I think green tea is also another one of them, but I know fermented foods are number one. Small molecule therapy. So there are drugs targeting specific pathways for beta cell proliferation. People are really doubling down on harmine and the derivatives of harmine. Combination approaches, like I mentioned before, the DYR, the harmine and the GLP-1A, and then stem cells, okay, which I've kind of moved on from emotionally. There are some advances in generating beta-like cells. The only challenge is, by regenerating beta cells, are we actually addressing the root cause of what caused these beta cells to go away in the first place? And if we haven't, we're kind of just like adding, we're taking 2 steps forward without addressing what's causing us to take 3 steps back. So why I focus on natural compounds to begin with, they're accessible. I haven't gotten any of the things that I have now to address type 1 diabetes from a doctor. Have not filled a prescription in years. So I like the social aspect of things in terms of like, this is approachable for anyone, regardless of your standing with a doctor or the healthcare system. You can do it. And it's going to cost less because of that. Reduced risks compared to invasive therapies like stem cell transplantation. You're not going under the knife. You're eating things, or you're not eating things, or you're exercising more. And I like it because it's complementary to existing therapies and lifestyle changes. Becoming more physically active is going to help you on many different fronts, not just a diabetic one. So I kind of like the idea of like, okay, yeah, we need to eat healthy and we need to exercise. It's not just for diabetes, but it has very targeted effects for people with diabetes. This is just a little list I made of the natural compounds linked to beta cell growth and regeneration. So harmine, obviously, GABA, polysaccharides in the reishi mushrooms and the bee pollen, curcumin, which is found the active component of turmeric, berberine, EGCG. I'm not even going to pretend like I know how to pronounce that, but that's what is found in green tea. That's one of the active components in green tea. It's a really powerful antioxidant. Resveratrol, quercetin, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin D. They've all shown direct impacts on influencing beta cell growth and regeneration. So that feeds, pun intended, how we can actively support our own beta cell regeneration. So immune modulation, it sounds fancy, but it's really just making sure that we're not doing anything that is over engaging our immune system. So antioxidant intake, reducing inflammation, and giving our body all of the nutritional support it needs to actively fight any pre-existing inflammatory states, right? So we're giving our overactive immune system a break and getting rid of all the toxic byproducts of having had an overactive immune system. Then we get a little futuristic here, right? So there is, from the stems, people have heard my complaints about stem cell therapy in that it's like, okay, well, if you don't protect the beta cells that you're putting in, they're going to suffer the same fate that all the other ones did. And there is this hydrogel. So they're putting these pancreatic islets, they're putting it in this gel, and they're putting it in the body. So this is like protecting injected beta cells from immune attack, which is kind of cool from like a sci-fi standpoint, but it seems wholly unnecessary if we're able to kind of naturally do it with the foods and the vitamins and the nutrients that we're taking in. But cool, regardless, this is something that they're going on. I've got the source down there. So there's lots of different things at play here. You know, you've got the specific therapies, whether it be stem cells or the, you know, stem cells in hydrogel. Lifestyle changes are going to be an undeniable facet of taking care of the root causes from a dietary and nutrient standpoint, from a physical activity standpoint, and then from stress management. And then addressing the challenges of autoimmunity, making sure that our immune system is able to recognize the newly formed beta cells as not needing to be attacked. And then what ways can we enhance the slowed down regenerative capacity of our existing beta cells? How can we kind of like light a fire under them, so to speak, without burning them, but just kind of like giving them the notion like, hey, we need more of you. How can we get you going?
So we can clearly see that while there is a basis for our original understanding that beta cells aren't super regenerative and they're not like skin cells or liver cells where they just spontaneously regenerate, that doesn't mean that they don't have a pretty huge capacity and potential to regenerate. That one graph looking at all of the different cell types that can either directly become beta cells themselves or directly influence beta cells regenerating, it blows your mind. And now it starts to open up the doors to, okay, what are the specific factors that I can influence that are going to drive these different cell types to promote beta cells? And the amazing thing about it is a lot of the major technologies going into regrowing these beta cells is from natural sources. And so that just makes it more and more available to you and I. And with that understanding, okay, we've kind of lifted the pressure off of, okay, beta cells don't regenerate. It's like, yes, they do. They actually do it in a lot of different ways. They just need the right tools in order to do that. So we've got that in mind. Going into the next section, let's think about some of the secondary features of beta cells, specifically amylin and GABA. How are those, what are the details about amylin and GABA that we can kind of stack on top of the things needed to actually get those beta cells to regenerate, to create some inertia in the right direction?
So with this extra section on amylin and GABA, I just want to make sure that we are dotting our I's and crossing our T's when it comes to understanding what they are, how they act in a healthy state as well as in a diabetic state, and then what are some things that we can do to actually address their loss and their regain. So we know amylin slows down digestion to make sure that our beta cells don't get overloaded with incoming food, incoming blood sugar. People with type 1 diabetes do not have that ability to control how quickly food is moving through our system. And this leads to too rapid of digestion, too quick of a glucose spike after we eat, and there's no control of our appetite, so we tend to overeat, and this just exacerbates that rapid digestion and that rapid post-meal blood spike. And so a lot of systems at play here, right? With that amylin, it's acting on the brain, which acts on the stomach. Amylin also influences the liver because now, there's no control of the glucagon after a meal. Like there's nothing telling it to stop when we take in food. So how can we actually address it? There are synthetic forms of amylin. It's called pramlintide. This mimics amylin's effects. It's typically prescribed in cases of type 2 diabetes, kind of like as an appetite suppressant to make sure that people with type 2 don't overeat. For those with type 1, you really kind of have to go the manual route. This can be helped with high fiber and protein-rich meals to naturally slow digestion. Fiber is something that slows down digestion. Protein is something that's going to naturally make you feel full. So there's ways that you can kind of build an amylin-like response based on the food that you're taking in. And then GABA, right? It's not just a neurotransmitter. Influences inflammation, regulates inflammation, protects beta cells, modulates glucagon secretion from alpha cells to make sure that our blood sugars aren't unnecessarily spiking. And then it can actually promote beta cell replication, survival, the conversion of alpha cells to beta cells. And in type 1 diabetes, we lose all of this. So our inflammation gets exacerbated. We lose the ability to influence our nervous system to promote beta cell health, and does not bode well for our blood sugars and the survival of our remaining beta cells. So how can we leverage GABA for beta cell health? I've got this nice little graph over here of foods rich in GABA. Go ahead and read that. Early studies suggest it may reduce inflammation and promote beta cell regeneration if you supplement GABA directly. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. I use Thorne has a GABA supplement. I'm also experimenting with something called N-nicotinyl GABA, which is a synthetic formation of nicotinamide or niacinamide, which is vitamin B3, and GABA, which promotes its uptake through the blood-brain barrier and makes it more readily available. Nutritional support, things like magnesium, B6, and GABA. There seems to be a kind of like a trifecta of those three that influences GABA's natural production. So you can see here, just in this graph, GABA is not far away from a food standpoint, right? All of these things are going to help your body naturally produce its own. And then in a state of disease, when you lose amylin and GABA, it's really hard for your body to naturally control the inflammation that is destroying your beta cells, which is destroying the production of even more amylin and GABA. So the digestion, the glucose spikes, the inability to control your own appetite is going to lead to more inflammation, more overproduction of glucagon, which is going to cause even more hyperglycemia, and this just leads to more and more beta cells. So this is beta cell stress, which is just one of those feedback loops where things start to run out of control. So we need comprehensive strategies that are addressing both the hormonal and inflammatory nature of these imbalances and their impacts on beta cells. So the body wants more amylin and more GABA. So as we approach kind of this regenerative aspect of beta cells, we need to start to implement these ways of either synthetically mimicking amylin and GABA or empowering our body in any way that we possibly can to boost its own natural production of these things so that it can kind of stop the inertia working against beta cells and start to turn it going in the opposite direction.
So I've spent a good amount of time on amylin and GABA, driving home why they're so influential and why they're so important. And I think the most important thing we can take from that last section is there are ways, lifestyle factors, dietarily, things that we can do to help our body mimic the effects of amylin, mimic the effects of GABA, whether it be fibrous and protein-rich foods, kind of keeping us full and slowing the food down so that our insulin has time to react, or with GABA, making sure that we have or alternative ways of regulating our nervous system and that we're eating things that are fighting oxidation the way GABA would. That's such an important step that we can be taking in an effort to support beta cells. And on the topic of supporting beta cells, let's move on to the next section where we learn more about the importance of not just regenerating, but protecting the ones that we already have.
The importance of protecting beta cells. We know how important beta cells are, obviously. People with type 1, we're so concerned with getting new ones because we don't have enough. They aren't doing the right things. So we need to preserve the existing ones that we have and create an environment conducive to regeneration. One point I want to take pause and get across is that even if you have type 1 diabetes, even if you had it for 50 years, you still have beta cells. You still have them. They're still there. You see that top paper there, residual insulin production and pancreatic beta cell turnover after 50 years of diabetes. Okay? And that wasn't a case study. That wasn't like, oh, we found one person. It's like it was worthy of a report. So I'm telling you, it doesn't matter how long you've had diabetes, your pancreas is still functioning. It still has beta cells. It's just a matter of creating the correct environmental conditions to allow for those beta cells to flourish. And that's what we really need to pay attention to. So we got to nourish them, right? We've got to make sure that we are giving them the right things to grow. Antioxidants. This is kind of like the out with the bad aspect of in with the good, out with the bad. Antioxidants protect the beta cells from oxidative stress. Vitamin C, vitamin E, the fat solubles, glutathione. We get into things like magnesium, vitamin D, which I can't believe didn't make it on this slide, but fat soluble vitamins in the antioxidant aspect of things. Vitamin D is there, okay? Zinc supports insulin production and beta cell health. Magnesium is involved in every single enzymatic process in glucose metabolism. We are chronically deficient as a society now. So magnesium is going to be a major part in creating an environment where beta cells can do what they need to do, right? Anti-inflammatory foods, omega-3 fatty acids, green tea keeps coming up, dark berries, dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is also magnesium rich. It's got plenty of other antioxidants in it as well. And then this is kind of just a good way that I look at things for the importance of what goes into beta cell health. So at the foundation, whole foods. Like we've got to get past the processed foods, or like no more enrichment, no more fortification. Adequate fiber, right? The processing of foods is what is like robbing everything of its inherent nourishment, right? So adequate fiber, nutrient dense, healthy fats, right? So healthy fats kind of plays into the, unmeddled with unprocessed foods aspect of things, but just pay attention to real food. That's really like in your day-to-day life. Not like, oh, I'm going on a diet of whole foods. It's like, no, this is what eating is from now on. And once you have that foundation in place, you have a resurgence of available vitamins and minerals. There are specific ones that you want to focus on when it comes to beta cells specifically. Magnesium, vitamin B6, vitamin B3 as well, niacinamide, trace minerals, zinc, copper, manganese, selenium, chromium, vanadium. These are all things that both operate in beta cells directly in terms of handling stress in the cell itself, but also in outside things like the gut. Iron metabolism involves all of those trace minerals. You need all of them in order to handle iron properly. D3K2, in terms of managing our calcium levels, now that I kind of think vitamin D's biggest role is in making sure calcium goes to where it needs to, because if it doesn't, it can really mess with insulin secretion. But there's no limit on its roles in immunity as well. and then the fat solubles, right? So making sure that we're paying attention to our liver health, right? Liver is what's responsible for digesting fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, retinol, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Huge, huge antioxidant capacity. We don't get nearly enough the way that our food is processed. And so focus on rich natural sources of those. Then plant compounds, right? Those, again, come along with the foundation of whole foods. But quercetin, resveratrol, curcumin, EGCG, these are the all-stars. You're going to find them in just about any paper on natural ways to mitigate inflammation and help yourself with diabetes. And let's not forget the top left-hand corner here: regular exercise, clean water, healthy stress management, right? You have to, this is foundation, right? The exercise, clean water, stress management, and whole foods, that is the foundation from which everything else grows, right? We need to make sure that those are for granted, right? There's no debating those. Because they all have incredible ties to beta cell health, from blood sugar management standpoint, from a stress reduction standpoint, from a rest, recovery, and regenerate standpoint. Huge. Okay. So could be building lean muscle mass through weightlifting, HIIT training, walks, running, you name it. Stress reduction. Lots of different ways to do this. Avoiding your electronics too late at night. Sleep hygiene is a big part of this, making sure that you're staying hydrated, making sure that you're getting your electrolytes. Sweating is a big part of your body's natural ability to detox. Make sure that you are sweating. And kind of just like building an intuition with your body, resting when you need to rest, going when you need to go, and riding the waves of hunger, not hungry, not eating because you're bored, right? Don't eat because you're bored, eat because you're hungry. If you're bored, you could drink water, drink tea or something like that to kind of, fill your hands. But do everything that you possibly can to reduce any sort of outside sources of stress on your beta cells. And then some of the outside things. So I've got an episode here on me going to the chiropractor, what I learned about dural tension, vagal tone, lots of really interesting nervous system stuff that kind of goes by the wayside in the wellness world. But I think there's a lot of merit to it. Herbal support, turmeric, berberine, those are just two examples. There's a lot more. I've got a link in my description for a supplement, herbs and supplement guide. Supplementing GABA, alpha lipoic acid, these are all natural antioxidants. And then things like acupuncture, it errs on the side of woo-woo, but managing your energy, your emotional energy, making sure that you are moving regularly, allowing energy to flow regularly. You have emotional outlets, you have people to talk to, your social network is very important. Make sure that you are also checking those boxes. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate the science behind all of this. I don't want you to think I've made any of this up. Some of it requires out-of-the-box connecting dots, but there's pretty much a paper behind each and everything that I've talked about here. Harmine and GABA, for me, is one of the most exciting just because it is kind of naturally sourced and very targeted for beta cells. There's always more coming out. There's always more to learn. So our microbiome, like what are the specific bacterial strains that we can pay attention to that are going to help create more GLP or help fight pathogens, and in the long run, preserve our beta cell health. And then long-term goals, realizing that everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. There's going to be a personalized approach, combining the nutrition aspect, the outside therapies, all of the lifestyle adjustments necessary. It's going to be dependent on where you're starting from, right? What nutrients do you need? What's your diet been like? What's your emotional status like? What's your stress status like? It's going to be different for everyone. So everyone kind of needs to start educating. Education is the root, right? Because once you know, you can kind of start to make educated decisions in addressing your unique situation. Pretty straightforward here, like none of these things are going to like change your life in a week. This is what you do now for a long period of time. I've been at this 2.5 years now. And the mindset of, oh, this is just what I do now, as opposed to, well, I took this berberine for 3 months and it didn't cure me, so it doesn't work. Not necessarily, right? It's still an important piece in a larger puzzle. You've got that puzzle piece in place. Now it's just a matter of finding the other puzzle pieces that create a whole picture, right? So diet, lifestyle, integrative approaches, and future opportunities. Always keep your eyes open for what's to.
I know you've heard all of this before, right? Clean water. Oh, make sure you exercise regularly. Oh, make sure you eat healthy. All of this, we've been overloaded with this kind of like diet and exercise prescription to the point where we don't hear it anymore. And it's not specific enough to our unique condition for us to give it any validity. But we can clearly see that there are direct influences on our overall health and thus our beta cell health by taking part in these very, very simple and straightforward means to reduce oxidative stress and put our body in a position to sustain beta cells. So I don't want you to take any of this lightly. Sleep hygiene puts you in a better position to regrow beta cells. Drinking clean water puts you in a better position to regrow beta cells. Not eating processed foods, getting outside and getting sunlight on your skin on a regular basis is a way to put your body in a better position to regrow beta cells. Don't take that too lightly.
So I can't thank you enough for being here and listening in. We've learned a lot, right? Beta cells there's more to them than meets the eye. They produce more than just insulin. It's amylin, it's GABA, it's controlling our blood sugar, it's influencing our digestion and managing inflammation on their own. They're vulnerable and they need help from what we do in our lifestyle, as well as in how we can support the organs that are there as buffers for the oxidative stress reaching those beta cells. So we need to make sure that we are paying attention to those organ systems, the gut, the liver, the nervous system, and making sure that they are getting what they need to protect the beta cells. We talked about the theories behind how type 1 even develops, right? It's very, in my mind, very unlikely that type 1 is just a single cause thing. Like, oh, you had the genes, boom, you're done. Oh, autoimmune, your immune system decided to go rogue. No, there's so much more at play here. And knowing that puts the power in your hands, because there's so many things going on. It's impossible for you not to be able to positively influence something along the way. And now it's just a matter of stacking habits and stacking therapies to get to a point where everything's safe enough to grow, right? And at the very least, learning these things, I hope that you have some newfound hope for what's to come. And I really do think that it's an inevitable ending to all of this, is that we do regrow beta cells that are able to stick around. So what can you do about it now, right? Dietary, lifestyle, and staying informed in the research so that when it comes time to make decisions, you are comfortable with how what you're being told fits into your unique situation. That's about it. So I have used the gut intelligence test from Viome. I've used the liver and gallbladder flush book. Both of those will be linked in the description. They'll be on my website as well. Yesterday was the best day to start. So today might as well start something too. You've got to be able to incorporate beta cell supportive foods and habits into your daily routine. Don't overcomplicate it. Get rid of the processed foods, start eating whole foods, pay attention to vitamins and minerals, and you'll be surprised the progress you see. Keep learning, stay informed, whether that's, I'm all in on this, so subscribe here, follow on TikTok. I'm always talking about some aspect of diabetes research and kind of changing the narrative on how type 1 diabetes progresses. So you've got to stay engaged. You've got to keep learning. And obviously, our power as healers, as people making changes, is in our ability to connect and convey ideas. That all gets a lot easier when we start to share our stories, share our experiences, our wins and our losses equally, so that we can learn from one another and build something really incredible. So I cannot thank you enough for being here. Again, subscribe here, follow on TikTok, comment, start a conversation with someone, start it with me. I have my contact information throughout my social media, so do not hesitate to reach out to me. This is stuff I want to talk about, okay? So that's episode 46 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio, The Secret Life of Beta Cells. Thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.